talk about compound interest. Compound interest is something that is really important for us to know about because it's how you earn money in a bank or in a CD, which is a certificate of deposit, or any account that earns interest. Compound interest means when you earn interest on top of interest. So if you invest money in a bank, you earn interest on that. They put that interest in your account, and then the next time you earn interest on your slightly bigger balance. So if you start with this much money and they add a little bit of interest, then they take a percent of that bigger number, so they add a little even more interest. Now your balance of money is even bigger, and so your percent interest is even bigger. Okay? Now the thing that's interesting, if you ever go online or go to a bank, they always give you the interest rate. I don't think you're going to find 3% interest anywhere right now, but let's pretend you were getting a CD, which is short for certificate of deposit, and you found 3% interest, which means that every year you earn 3% interest. But then there's this thing here called APY. And it's not 3%, it's a little more than 3%, 3.04% interest. Or perhaps another account had 1.5% interest, but then they say the APY is 1.51% interest. What the heck is going on? Or an account that has a 2% interest on anything you are, any money that you're putting in there, it's really 2.02. What in the heck? APY stands for annual percent yield. And yield means, what you get out of it. So we are going to talk about how this works. In other words, how is it possible that the bank says you have a 3% interest, but you actually earn at the end of the year 3.04%? Or if your advertised interest was 1.5%, how is it that you actually are earning a little more than that? You're actually going to earn 1.51% interest at the end of the year. Or in the case, if your interest rate is 2%, you're actually going to earn 2.02% interest at the end of the year. Where does this APY come from? It comes from compound interest. So let me explain how compound interest works. So let's say you are investing $1,000. Okay? That's what I'm going to start with. And let's say that my annual interest rate is 2%. Okay? Now, I know of no banks that do this, but a bank could, let's say, take your $1,000 and just have your $1,000 sit there, and then at the end of the year, they would add your 2% interest. Well, this is just like our percent growth. You start with 100% of your money, and then you're adding your 2% at the end of the year, and you're doing that once, right? So we've done this before. That would be 102%. And percent in decimal land is 1.02, right? And you can try to figure this out in your head. I bet you can, or you can do it in a calculator. And that's basically going to earn us $20 in interest, which means my principal, the amount I would have in my bank at the end of 1 year, would be $1,020. Okay? I'm going to say this is equal to P. P is sometimes what we use here for my principal, how much money I have in the bank. So this would be if I figured out the interest, and the word for figuring out that they usually use is compound. So they compounded the interest, which means they put the interest in your account once a year or annually. So that's once per year. Now I just said that I don't know of any banks that do this. Because what most banks do is they compound interest not just once a year, but they compound the interest maybe 4 times a year. That would be called quarterly. Or maybe 12 times a year, monthly. Or maybe they compound the interest every day, 365 times a year, or even more than that. That's what most banks do. So how do they do that? Let's see. Let's say we have $1,000 invested at 2% interest, and that the bank is compounding the interest quarterly. So, in other words, 4 times per year. So what that means is that the bank figures out your interest, not just once a year, but 4 times a year, and they figure out your interest and they put it in your bank 4 times a year. Now, sometimes people think this means you get 2% 4 times a year. Well, that would be nice because that would get you a lot of money, but that's not how the bank does it. The way the bank does it is, instead of figuring out 2%, right, before we had 100% plus 2%, what they do is they start out with the $1,000, okay? That's multiplied by 100%. Then they take the 2% and they divide it. They give you 1/4 of your interest. And if you think about it, that makes sense because they're going to do this 4 times. So they're not going to give you 2%. They're going to give you 1/4 of 2%. And they're going to do that how many times per year? 4 times per year. So we're going to let X equal the number of years. Okay? And P is your amount of money at time X. All right? So here's your $1,000. Multiplied by 100% plus 1/4 of your interest, and they do that 4 times per year. Now again, let's just translate this into decimal land. 100% in decimal land is 1. 2% in decimal land is 0.02. So I'm taking 1/4 of that and doing it 4 times per year. So if I asked how much money would I have in my account after 1 year? After 1 year. Well, let's put 1 in for my X, and then let's grab our calculator and actually put this in. So I'm going to do 1,000 and then parentheses times 1 plus 0.02 divided by 4, close your parentheses, and then do the caret and raise it to 4, or 4 times 1, and drum roll please, you should get on your calculator this. It's decimal, 150,501. Now let's turn this into money. I'm rounding to the nearest cent. That's going to be 15 cents. Oh, let's compare this. So when I compounded it once a year, I just made $20. When I'm compounding my interest 4 times a year, I'm getting $20.15. So there's the difference, right? Compounding it 4 times a year, I made 15 more cents. And you might say, well, big whoop. Do you say big whoop anymore? I don't know if people say that anymore. But does that make a big difference? Well, sure, it makes a big difference if you have more money in there, or it makes a big difference over time. And that's the thing that's important for us to always know. When we're investing money and we're earning interest, even if the interest is low, if we leave it in there for long enough, exponential growth, man, you're going to be making money. Okay, so this was compounded quarterly. Let's try compounded monthly. monthly. So the same scenario, $1,000 invested at 2%. But now let's say the bank is figuring out your interest and putting it into your account monthly, 12 times a year. So I'm going to cut right to decimal land. So instead of writing 100%, I'm going to write 1, because 100% in decimal land is 1, plus 2% in decimal land is 0.02. So 12 times a year, I'm going to get a 12th of my interest. A 12th of my interest. And I'm doing that 12 times per year. So there's my equation. How much money would I have after 1 year? Well, let's go ahead and put this in your calculator. You can pause the video and do this yourself. I'll do this up here. Do try this at home. Let's see, and raising it to the 12 times 1. Okay, I got, rounding to the nearest cent, ooh, so my interest was $20.18. So look at that, I'm making more money than I did compounding it 4 times a year. Hey, just for fun, how much money would I have after 20 years? Let's say I didn't touch this money, I didn't invest any more money just after 20 years. Well, what I'm going to do, of course, put this in the calculator. It's going to be 1,000 times 1 plus 0.02 over 12 raised to the 12 times 20. All right, let's try this. So put this in your calculator. Everything is the same except for the exponent now. It's going to be raised to the 12 times 20. And that's going to give me about $1,491.33 after 20 years. Hey, I'm curious. Let's go back to if I had just figured out my interest once a year. If I had just figured out my interest once a year after 20 years, let's say 20 years, where do you think the 20 would go? Yeah, you're right. It would go right there. Boink. Let's see how much money I would earn if the bank was just figuring out my interest once a year. Let's see, that would be $1,485.95. About, yeah. So look, it does make a difference. And again, you're saying, well, that's not that much after 20 years. But every little bit makes a difference. But wait, there's more. I could compound. I could find a bank that compounds my interest daily. Daily. Let's say 365 times per year, even though there's a little more than 365 days in the year, depending on if it's a leap year or not a leap year. Pause the video and try to set up an equation that would figure out how much money would you have in your account after X years. So in other words, just come up with an equation. See if you can do this. Write an equation that's going to give you the amount of money, let's call that P. If you invested $1,000, 2% interest, compounded daily, 365 times per year, how much money would you have after X years? All right, let's try it. So here's my starting amount of money, $1,000, times 100%, which in decimal land is 1, plus 2%, which in decimal land is 0.02. And I'm not getting 2%, but I'm getting a fraction of that, 365th of 0.02%. And I'm doing that how many times per year? 365 times per year. There is your equation right there, or your model. That would tell us how much money you would have in your account after X years. So give me a number. What should I plug in? Well, let's start with 1 year. So go ahead and put this in your calculator. You're going to replace the X with a 1. And you're just going to put it on in, 1,000 times 1 plus 0.02 divided by 365. And then caret, 365 times 1. And I got, rounded to the nearest penny, $1,020.20. All right. Hey, let's do 20 years again. Okay. 1,000 times 1 plus 0.02 over 365 raised to 365 times 20. Hey, just a little word of warning. Depending on your calculator, sometimes you have to put parentheses around your 365 times 20. Depending on your calculator, sometimes the calculators need you to do that and sometimes they don't. So if you're getting a different answer from what I'm getting, try putting parentheses around that exponent. I got for this $1,491.81 about. So this is compound interest. This is compound interest. And you know, it can get a little more complicated if you have something like, let's do one more, and then we'll call it a day. Let's say I'm investing, I don't know, $25,000. We're thinking big. At, let's say, 1.5% interest. And let's compound this quarterly. So again, quarterly means how many times a year? Yeah, 4 times. So let's set up a model. Pause the video, see if you can do it. Here we go. The amount of money I'll have at time X is my starting amount times 100%, which is 1, plus. Okay, now, how am I going to write 1.5% as a decimal? Well, if you recall, percent means out of 100, so you can always just move your decimal 2 places to the left. So it's going to be 0.015. Okay, that's a little tricky. That's 1.5% in decimal land. All right, I'm doing this quarterly, so 4 times a year I'm going to get a fourth of this, a fourth of that interest 4 times per year. Okay, where X is the number of years. Okie doke. And then depending on the number of years, you just replace your X with however many years and put it in your calculator. That's compound interest. Now, believe it or not, banks often do something that's called continuous. They sometimes will do something that's called compounding interest continuously. And that involves a really cool irrational number, a number kind of like pi. That's called E. But you'll get to that later in your lives. But if you've ever seen the number E, that shows up in this compound interest. And if you're interested, let me know and I can tell you more about E. All right, my friends, have fun.
We've got a break.